This is David Berkowitz, better known as the son of Sam. Very notorious. Several movies were made about him. Spike Lee did a movie not about him, but about the feeling of what it was like to live in New York in 1977 when the son of Sam was going around murdering people. Bad dude. Most people know his story. He killed 8 people, tried to kill 2 others, real demented, would leave notes, left notes with 2 of the victims, would send notes to the newspaper, kind of taunting the police and like playing a cat and mouse game with them. Real satanic, real demented. He claimed that his neighbor's dog was giving him messages but he just made that stuff up, and it's like a satanic cult, all weird stuff. So most people know that part of his story. Very few people know the rest of his story, which goes 10 years later. 1987, while he's reading a Bible, which was given him by a fellow inmate, he comes across Psalm 34, verse 6. It said, "The poor man called out, and the Lord heard him. He saved him from all his troubles." Berkowitz had a dramatic conversion to Christianity. He's no longer a son of Sam. He had become a son of hope. Now, some of you might think this was just some ploy, like a trick so he could get out early parole. But contrary to what you think, when his first parole hearing came up in 2002, Berkowitz sent a letter to Governor Pataki and basically asked them to cancel it. He doesn't want to have a parole hearing. He wrote, "In all honesty, I believe that I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I have, with God's help, long ago come to terms with my situation, and I have accepted my punishment." He recognized that under man's laws, he was not only getting exactly what he deserved, he actually deserved far worse than what he was getting in our world. In fact, when one of his fellow inmates sliced his throat, he refused to give any information about him, testify, say anything about it, because as far as he was concerned, he deserved far worse than that. Berkowitz does not seek freedom from this earthly prison because he already has been released from a far greatest punishment, which awaits everyone who ignores Christ's free atonement on their behalf. Now, the very fact that Berkowitz can be forgiven and go to heaven is a terrible stumbling block for most people. It is an obstacle between unbelievers and receiving the gospel. I even guarantee there are people in this room tonight who are offended by the fact that Berkowitz can go to heaven. It seems like there's a fundamental unfairness to him. I'm sure there's some of you are thinking, you're telling me I lived my whole life, I never did anything wrong by your standard, and this guy, a serial killer, a murderer, can go to heaven simply because he believes in Jesus' sacrifice for him? Well, that's exactly what I'm telling you, because that's what the Bible says. Luke chapter 23. It says, "One of the criminals who was hanged railed against him, saying, 'Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us.' But the other rebuked him, saying, 'Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds. This man has done nothing wrong.' And he said, 'Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.' And he said to him, 'Truly I say to you, today, you will be with me in paradise.'" So that right there is the difference between the laborers and Berkowitz or the thief on the cross. The laborers believe they deserve more. The thief on the cross actually had the accurate perspective of who he was. Now, we like to list only our accomplishments and somehow think that a infinite, holy, perfect, just God is going to be impressed with our accomplishments. But that doesn't even work in court here on earth. You can't get a traffic citation, go into court and tell the judge all the traffic laws you obeyed. No, you're guilty for what you violate. Now the laborers are exactly like that rich young ruler we learned about in the last lesson. Now he came to Jesus and tried to tell him all the commands he's obeyed throughout the years perfectly. Well, one, I highly doubt he followed even those commands perfectly, but we'll give him that. Jesus corrected him and showed him the areas where he still lacked, and reminded him that the standard to enter a perfect paradise is nothing less than perfection itself. Per James 2:10, whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point becomes guilty of all of it. So those who think they can somehow earn heaven are in a perpetual state of ingratitude. They're miserable because they're always comparing themselves to the next guy. Now conversely, those like Berkowitz or the thief, they realize the next guy is not the standard. Christ himself is the standard by which all of us will be judged. And when you realize that, you realize how far all of us fall short. Now when you compare yourself to a serial killer, when you think you come out looking like Christ. But the reality is, when you compare yourself to Christ, from God's perspective, you don't look any better than a son of Sam.